Hello, welcome to another live. Today we are going to be learning how to package an app with AWS CodeBuild. Woohoo! I am very excited to be doing this part with you guys. So I'm going to jump right in and let's get started. All right, today what we're doing is part 4 of our DevOps series of AWS projects. I can't believe we're at part 4 already. It's insane. It's been a lot of learning, and there's so much more to come. We still have parts 4, 5, and 6 to finish off. Man, I'm excited. I'm very excited about what's to come. Okay, please let me know whether you can hear. Otherwise, I'm about to start right away. Alrighty. Okay, so what I'm seeing right now on the right-hand side of my screen is the Nextwork community. This is where we're going to find a step-by-step guide for today's project. And on the left-hand side of my screen is our AWS management console that we're about to log into. So when you enter the Nextwork community, this is how you can find the guide that we're about to walk through for today's project. If you aren't in the community yet, come join us. We are at the link in the bio. I can't wait to see you in the other side. All you have to do is find all AWS projects. And then you can find our latest project guide right over here, Package an App with AWS CodeBuild. So let's just click into that. And you can start your project right here. So all you have to do is click here, and bam, we are at the project. Special shout out to the Nextwork team and who have been working very hard behind the scenes creating this amazing app interface. What you can see here now is a gorgeous project interface with, here you have your low touch guide. This is where you can click on this version if you just want to walk through this project on your own. It's great for those looking for a challenge. Not all of the steps are going to be made obvious to you, but it's great for people that like to click around and just discover and just be like, okay, I know what I need to do, but they're not going to tell me where to click. I'll find that out on my own. High touch guide are for the people that want step-by-step instructions, and it's the version that we're going to be doing today. It's the version that says, I don't really know how to find my way around AWS yet. So yeah, tell me where to click, tell me what to type. I really want to create something in AWS, but I'm not at the stage where I can do a lot of things without close guidance yet. So let's click on high touch today and let's get started with our project. Man, I'm super hyped to do this with you guys. And our 30-second summary for today's project is, this is a 6-part project, and right now you're on project 4 out of 6, where you will learn how to use AWS CodeBuild. So between projects 1 to 3, you would have learned how to use Cloud9, you would have learned how to use AWS Code Commit, Code Artifact to build that Java web app from scratch, and also save copies of that web app's code and the dependencies in repositories. So now we're in part 4, where we're kind of like done with the creating side of that web app, and now we're kind of more on the side of the making that web app available to people. And CodeBuild is the first step to that. It's here to make the app ready for the world to see. Cool. So before we start every single project, please know to delete all your resources by the end of the day, even if you don't finish the project, okay? Because keeping your resources in your AWS account is pretty much the #1 way for charges to slowly rack up. We don't really want that today. And if you're ever stuck, ask the Nextwork community. You've just had a peek of the community just now at the very start of this chat. Students like you have already been asking questions for this project, and no question is too silly. So please know that if you're ever stuck, just ask. Someone's around. Cool. Now let's get ready to document for this project. All you have to do is click on the link here, and it's going to take you to a page that it's going to take you to a whole new tab that goes through the documentation steps for this project. I love flicking through the documentation steps at the very start to get a bit of a hint on what I'm going to be doing today. But to start with, all you need to do is make a copy to create your own documentation. That template that we've set up is like for everyone to make a copy of, so we're not going to edit that straight away. we're going to make our own copy, which I've just done. And you can delete that first cover page. And in this title page, add your name, to this title page. Make this yours right away. Boom, it's now mine. And you can also even change the file name at the very top here to add your name here. Whoops, Nets documentation guide. Beautiful. Are we ready to start with our project steps? I hope you are. I am. So with every single project in this series, you will be creating your web app from scratch again and again and again and again. And the reason for that is so that the learnings really stick in here. And also because you're supposed to delete all your resources at the end of the project. Please tell me you do. Because if you're even going to be spending 3 days or 1 week between these two projects, it's best to delete them so that those charges don't rack up. Okay, so that means the first half of this live project demo is going to be a repeat of projects 1 to 3 of the series. Know that, for example, step 1 says log into your IAM admin user. So if you've already done this before, you're more than welcome to skip. But we're here for the people that are like super new to this project and just really want that step-by-step guidance. So we're going to be doing every single step together. Okay, so let's start by creating our IAM user. So if you don't have that set up right yet, no worries. This project is going to start from the very top together. So when you find your management console, first, you're going to sign in as your root user. So the root user is the user that is pretty much a default user when you first create your AWS account. What that means is it is pretty much, you can think of it as the main account for your AWS account. But at the same time, AWS isn't a big fan of us using our root user for everyday use, because that root user is unique in that it has access to all of your billing information and a lot of the security information as well about you. So ideally, you're actually not using a root user for everyday projects. You're going to be using an IAM user, which is kind of like a second user that has access to the same account, but maybe doesn't have access to all of that like billing information, security information. So it's a bit safer for using every single day. Okay, so I'm going to sign in as my root user. Here we go. And then I'm going to create that IAM admin user. Okay, I'm going to start making the project steps slightly smaller here so you can see more of my AWS management console. But if you'd like to see more of the steps, if you'd like me to drag these screens around, let me know, and I'll adjust that for you. Okay, so we're here in our root users console, and let's set up our IAM user. Okay, so in the users page in your IAM console, you have to click on create user at the very top right hand corner, and then we're gonna just create our username. For the username, you can just put your name -IAM -admin. So I'm gonna do Natasha O -IAM -admin. And please make sure they have user access to the management console. And then you can just click next and you're done. Oh, interesting. We already have an invalid username. Usernames can only contain alphanumeric characters or any of the following. So I guess my username has something that breaks the rules here. Do you see it? I can't quite see it. Or maybe I need to make it Natasha 1. I think that's definitely alphanumeric. Next. Should we make it lowercase? Natasha, like this? Let's click next again. Doesn't seem to be working today. That's a bit strange. What do you think? Natasha, IAM, admin. Maybe the dashes aren't cooperating with us today? Natasha, IAM, admin. This should be okay. I'm gonna refresh my screen just in case it's something that can be saved by a refresh. Sometimes that genuinely is what happens. Let's try again. Natasha, I am admin. Surely. Surely. Oh, that worked. Okay, that worked. I think what could have happened there, my theory is that what could have happened is maybe when I copied and pasted this, something else secretly got pasted into my entry, into my text field, and that would have caused it to say, hey, you can't create that username. So if you run into the same issue, try to hand type your username or refresh the screen and hand type it one more time. Sometimes copy and pasting adds some sort of interesting like formatting to the text that you can't see, but the computers will read. I've had this experience multiple times now, and definitely hand typing has saved me a bunch. Okay, for our admin user, we're going to attach these permission policies directly, and we're going to be using the, that is not the most beautiful way to see our permission policies, is it? Okay, so we're going to be using the administrator access, which gives you access to literally everything in your account except for a lot of that billing information. Your IAM user doesn't need that. So we're going to create the user right away and stay here. Don't click on return to the users list. It's a nice, beautiful orange button, but we're going to be staying here because we need to download the CSV file containing your IAM user's login details. So once you've downloaded that, you're now ready to start this project as your IAM user instead of the root user. So you can even copy the console sign-in URL, and this is the URL that your IAM user will need to get access to the account. And let's sign out. Sign out, sign out. Back it up, back it up. Okay, so now we're out of our AWS Management Console as the as the root user, and let's log back in as the IAM user. So what I did was I just pasted that console sign-in URL into my browser. I clicked enter, and now I'm here. So we're here. We're seeing that there's a field for the username, for the password. It's now asking for the IAM user's access details, which you can find just by clicking on that CSV file you downloaded just now. So let's click on that CSV file and let's zoom all the way in so you can see that there's actually your access details right here, the username and the password that it's asking for. And let's paste that into the login screen so that you can see it. Beautiful. Once you do that, you can sign in. And it's asking me to reset this to a new password. Again, a very good security measure so that if you're going to be creating this IAM user for someone else, now that you've downloaded a CSV file of their account details, technically you now have access to their account. But now AWS is saying like, oh, well, since you're passing this on to a new user, we're going to make sure they actually reset this password to something that they know, that only they know, so no one else really has access to it. So I'm going to put in the old password that was given to me, and let's put in a new password in here. And let's confirm that password change to make sure our IAM user now has a password that only I know. And even though I have literally just shown you my generated password to the world in this live, no one can actually access my account anymore because it's a new password now. Yeah, pretty good measure to have, I'd say. I'd vouch for that. Cool. So now that we have created our IAM user, we're now ready to create our Cloud9 environment, which is going to be our IDE environment. If you're unfamiliar with the term IDE, that's totally okay. IDE is basically the environment or the place where you can write and edit your code for the web app itself. You can think of it as like the working space, the writing space, where you're really creating the web app that you're wanting to put out into the world. And if you can think of, for example, authors would have maybe text editors like a Word document open to actually write and create their book. An IDE is kind of like that. It's kind of like that text editor, that Google Docs for you to write and create your web app. In this case, we're going to create an environment, which is kind of like creating a Google Docs or like a Google folder or Google workspace for us to start creating these files and put together the pieces for our code or for our web app. So let's get started with that. So let's start by adding the name, Network IDE. The environment type is going to be a new EC2 instance, which means our IDE is going to be hosted on an EC2 instance. So a virtual computer in the cloud is going to be running this IDE. And for the instance type, we're going to use t2.micro because it's free tier eligible, so we don't get charged. And the platform is going to be Amazon Linux too. Very nice. Now that we've set it up, we can create the environment. If I'm going a bit too fast, by the way, it's because I am repeating the steps from the first 3 projects of the series. So I definitely recommend that you check out projects 1, 2, 3 of this series to catch up if you'd like. And the links to those are all in the description as well. Awesome stuff. Okay, so just gonna double check everything is okay here. And now that our IDE is created, you can click open right here to activate your IDE, kind of wake it up, be like, all right, I'm ready to start building. And how we do that is by first waiting our 15 seconds for it to warm up, give it time. And then after that, we're gonna be installing Maven and Java. Maven and Java are the tools that are going to really help us create a web app from scratch. Java is the programming language that helps us with creating web apps. And then Maven is kind of like a package manager. So it's kind of like the manager that's going to help us pull in all these different tools that we're going to need to create our web app. Going back to that authors writing books and needing text editors kind of analogy, you can think of Java as kind of like the language that they're using to write their book, whereas Maven is kind of like the tools in the toolbar that helps them with, creating the story or creating the book itself. So for example, like formatting tools, Maven is kind of like the tool that's like install the ability to bold, install the ability to add headings. It really is kind of like that package manager that works very, very closely with you, even though I guess like what you create or what you install with Maven isn't something that your users can see right away. It's kind of like this tool manager that helps you with putting things together. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is install Maven, that package manager I just talked about. The code to that is already in our step-by-step guide. So all you have to do is paste that in here and run that. Cool. All right, so it's running now. It's doing its job, so thank you so much. And you can always drag these around to give yourself more space to see what's happening in the terminal. Again, if you'd like a slower kind of walkthrough around what's going on here, I'd check out project 1 in this series for this one. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install Java, which is the programming language. So I'm going to wait for this to finish. We can't overload our terminal with 2 things to do at the same time. We're just going to wait our turn, wait for this to finish first, and then put in our second command. But yeah, these commands are basically telling our terminal like, hey, let's install Java 8 and put it in this folder. Okay, so, I was not supposed to open my notes, but let's just paste in those commands right now and watch it run. All right, here we go. Okay, it's running now. Very cool. Okay, so it's running. It's installing Java into our local computer. And whenever I say local computer, I don't mean the computer like the physical laptop that I'm using in front of me right now. The local computer is actually that EC2 instance that we're using to host our IDE. So don't forget that at the end of the day, with AWS, everything is about cloud infrastructure. So it's pretty much like a lot of the classic like physical tools are now in the cloud. And in this case, that physical computer is actually an EC2 instance that's in the cloud. So next, we're going to verify that Java is installed correctly. So we're going to run this next. And if you see that thing that says 1.8.0, that means you have the correct version going for Java. So you're ready to run the next command, which is nvn v over here. Very cool. Eunice is here. Hey, Eunice. Thanks so much for being here. Eunice says, all right. Oh, this is cool. Are you getting started with this project too? Have you done the other parts of this project already, or is this something that you're starting fresh? Okay, so we have the right version of Maven installed as well. It's 3.5.2, so that's looking great. And once it's done, it means we're ready to create our Java web app from scratch. How we do that is we use these commands over here. That's basically saying, hey, Maven, I know you've already created web apps before. I know you have a template for this. So can you please use that template to create a Java web app for me? And yeah, once you're done, please just populate my IDE with the files that you've created. So off Maven goes saying like, okay, say less. Like I've created a web app before. Yeah, I know what to do. So it's now creating some of the Java web apps core files for me. And how you know it's done is you do this like dramatic review of your IDE on the side here, and dun dun dun, over here you can see our Nextwork web project is created. This folder is basically a folder that contains all of our web apps files in one place. Very, very cool. So Maven's literally gone and created all of this for us just using these commands that we've put in. You can even see like, I'm like, hey, like I want to create something, call that folder next web project, and then the ID for that is going to be called com.nextwork.app, etc., etc. So it's really just gone and created a whole web app for me based on the commands that I've given it. This web app is completely empty right now. So if anyone were to run this, it's not going to look like much. It's just going to have this hello world over here. So this is where we can, add our creative juices into this and modify this to make it our own. We're going to start with a beginner level version of modification because the more intense like customization stuff will happen later on in this series. But yeah, let's just change, once you copy the code in, just change your name tag to, you guessed it, your name. And once you're done, always make sure that you save your changes. Okay, it's not a Google Doc really. It's not the same as Google Doc because it doesn't auto save for you. You got to press Command S or Control S to make sure you're saving your changes. And Eunice says, yeah, I am starting fresh. Oh, this is cool. So I hope you enjoy this walkthrough. Please know that if it becomes a little bit too fast, it's because we are going to be repeating a few steps from the first 3 parts of this project. And if you'd like to have a slower explanation in this section, please check out those previous projects for that slower version of explanations, and then come to this one when you're ready. But yeah, it's so good to have you here. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're ready to create a repository in AWS Code Commit. So what we've done just now, we've ticked off the first project in this entire series, and now we're kind of reaching project 2 territory. So project 2 starts with us creating a repository in AWS Code Commit. And this repository is basically a way for us to save our source code somewhere safe. And it's also a great way for us to do some version control. Okay, and version control is basically us making sure that we have a copy of all the versions of this of the entire history of our web app, so that if we ever make any huge changes that broke our app, let's say, we can always be like, oh my god, what was the last living version of this web app that wasn't broken, and let's roll back to that point in time. So that we can start fresh again or start over from that point. Okay, so to do that, we're going to have to leave our Cloud9 environment for a little bit, because we're going to go back into our AWS Management Console, and we're going to go find a service called AWS Code Commit. Okay, so we're going to look for Code Commit right now. Oh, I was supposed to open it in a new tab. I was supposed to open Code Commit in a new tab, but it's okay if you haven't. You can always just keep going. Once you're in here, create your repository, and the details for your repository is all here as well. So we're going to name our project Nextwork Web Project. I'm going to give it a cute little description. And just like that, we're ready to create. Okay, let's create that. And once you've created your repository, you are ready to make your first commit. And your commit is kind of like your saves to this folder. Let's make our repository kind of like a folder in the cloud, and it's where we save the latest versions of our web app. I'm laughing because I see Lawrence in the comments saying, "Let's go, Nat." Thank you so much. Let's go, Lawrence. So to create our first commit, we're going to go back to our Cloud9 environment. That's where I am right now. And we're going to set up our Git identity. Again, setting up our Git identity is something that you can do just in your terminal. You might have noticed I accidentally clicked away. So to click back, we just click here. It's kind of like, they kind of like little tabs. And let's create our Git identity. Ooh, this is looking a bit spicy. So I'm going to press enter. Okay. And I'm going to set up my Git identity by entering git config -- I'm following this line, by the way. Following this line, -- global user.name, and put in your name in the commas. Is it called commas? Speech marks. So Natasha, that's me. And then you can go git config -- global user.email, speech marks. My email is natasha@nextwork.org. Aha! So I've just created my Git identity, which means that I've told Git, hey, my name's Natasha. This is my email. Now, if I've made any changes and I've saved those changes, assign those changes to my name. Pretty much like this is my signature that I've made those changes. And now we're going to tell our terminal to dive into the project that contains our web apps code. Okay, it's now in the web app projects folder now, because you can see the terminal now says I have moved from the environment to the project folder. It even says it out loud to you. And we're going to initiate the local repository. Okay, cool. So just by doing that one line, I've already initiated my local repository. That was incredibly fast. And then in the code commit console, I'm going to click here to clone my HTTPS, which is basically cloning the URL to my cloud folder that's going to keep pretty much like the most updated version of my code every time I save. And I'm going to make sure I connect these two. Again, if this is going a bit too fast, or you're thinking, these explanations are a little bit too quick for me, please check out Project 2 in this series, where we go through this part very, very slowly. And we're going to set the remote origin to the URL I just copied. So I'm going to go git remote add origin and paste in the URL I just copied from the tab before. Bam. Just like that, I've connected my local repository I've just set up to that cloud folder in code commit. So that's pretty cool. That was really fast. So now we can commit our changes. Now we can press save and say, hey, look, these folders that I've just created, Maven created all of these folders for me to create my Java web app from scratch. I want to save those changes. I want to make sure that my cloud folder with code commit, that code commit repository, is updated to reflect that. Because right now, if you look here, check your repository, it's empty. There's nothing in it. It doesn't register that you've actually created a web app from scratch already because you haven't saved those changes. So that's what these 3 lines are going to say. It's going to say, save those changes, please. Make sure it's reflected to the repository in the cloud. And bam, once I clicked enter, you can see that those lines will run super quickly. And now we can just refresh our code commit repository and see whether it's been updated. Let's hope it is. Lawrence, how was your day, by the way? So good to see you here. Yeah, just like that, I've refreshed my page. And look, my code commit repository in the cloud, my cloud folder is now updated to show the code or the Java web app files that I've already created with Maven just now. src, pom.xml, reflected perfectly in here. You can even click into these folders to verify that everything is reflected perfectly. src, there's a subfolder called main. Okay, click into that. There's another subfolder called web app. Click into that. It's so on and so forth. And you can see it exactly parrots the structure that's in my Cloud9 IDE, which means that I've successfully saved what I'm doing locally on my computer into that cloud folder, that cloud repository. So that's amazing. And Jong's here as well. It's a party in here today, guys. Thank you so much. Jong, welcome. Wow. You're always making my day, bro. Thanks so much for being here. Okay, so next, we have literally just finished project 2 in this entire series. So shall we move on to project 3 in this series? Project 3 in this series is about creating a code artifact repository to help secure your project's dependencies. So if you're unfamiliar with the term dependencies, just know that with every single web app that you create, at the end of the day, you're not creating literally everything from scratch. For example, sometimes you might be like, hey, I don't really have this built-in font. I'm going to install this font so that my web app has this font that it can display to its users. Just like that, you've pulled something from the public space and be like, I'm going to install this font into my web app. And that is now a package, which is kind of like an external resource or an external tool that you can use now in your web app. And any of those packages that your web app relies on to function correctly is called a dependency. So if that dependency no longer exists, like it's dead, and your web app says, oh my gosh, like it's gone now, like I can't function properly anymore, goodbye, or it can't function the way it's supposed to be, then that's a dependency. A lot of dependencies exist for all web applications out there. So for example, if I have a web app that has a map in it, that map is likely pulled from like an external tool. And that is kind of like my dependency now, because imagine if my web app depends on that map to function, because I'm like a best cafes in Austin Finder. And it all relies on that map for people to click around and drag and discover these cafes that I've like pinned on this map. And now let's say the developer or the person that created that package for me to pull into my web app says, oh, by the way, like this package that you've installed, this map is no longer available. Sorry, I'm pulling the plug. My web app's probably going to go down. And that's why it's so important for you to manage the risk of relying on these public external tools and resources with AWS Code Artifact, because AWS Code Artifact is where you keep a backup copy of all of these. So now if that map developer says, hey, sorry, I'm pulling the plug on this map package that you've been using, I can be like, hey, that's okay. You can pull the plug. I have a backup copy of what you've created, kind of like in my back pocket. In my AWS Code Artifact repository, there's a copy right there that I can pull from that now, instead of relying on your work that's in the public space. So yeah, for a more detailed breakdown of everything we're about to do now, that's all in project 3 of this series. Also, link in the description. But to get diving into it, you can find Code Artifact right here in the sidebar, artifacts, and let's create a domain. A domain is pretty much a folder that's like all of the packages that Nextwork uses falls under this huge domain. It's like a huge folder. I've already had my domain created, but if you need to create one from scratch, just click on that create domain button, and then in the domain name, type in the name of your domain. In my case, it's like Nextwork. And then you can click create domain, and then you're done. But in my case, AWS even says your account already has a domain and it only needs one. Doesn't need more than one. Because domains are pretty much where you put literally all the packages, unless you're a really big company with like extremely different products that all have that all can like survive on their own domains and don't really cross over in what they need. Otherwise, you organize all of those packages in repositories. So these are kind of like subfolders. So I'm going to create my first repository now, and the name for that is just going to be Nextwork packages. And then the description is packages for the Nextwork web app. I'm quite happy with that description. It's quite self-explanatory, I'd say. And the upstream repository is going to be Maven, because the Maven central repository has it's pretty much the widest library of Java packages out there. So I'm going to be using that. Next, I'm going to just confirm that it's this AWS account that owns this domain. Click next. And voila, we can review everything with this repository and create it. Very nice. I'm quite happy with this. So now that we've created our code artifact repository, it's kind of like saying, okay, I have my backup folder ready to start kind of keeping that backup copy of all of the packages related to my web app. Right now, let's see what packages are in the folder already. Nothing. Nothing's in this code artifact repository. Why? Because we haven't connected this repository to the project that we're building. So we have this project that's living in Cloud9 is living in AWS code commit. And we also have this code artifact repository that's like, hey, I'm ready to store some dependencies. I'm ready to store some packages. And we need to connect these two. Okay, there's nothing connecting these two right now. So to connect them, you can even just click here to view the connection instructions. We're using Mac and Linux. We're using Amazon Linux 2 for our Cloud9 IDE. So we'll click on Mac and Linux. Even if you're using a Windows computer, make sure you're clicking on Mac and Linux, by the way. Even if you're using a Windows computer. Because again, right now our local computer is at Amazon Linux 2 EC2 instance. And then for our package manager client, we're going to click on MVN, which is Maven. And right away, we can start using these steps to connect code artifact with our project. So I'm going to copy whatever is in step 3 and put it into my terminal. Boom, done. And then I'm going to create a settings.xml file. So I do that by running this piece of code, these two pieces of code, to head back to my project folder, make sure I'm there, and then create a new file called settings.xml. So boom, let me zoom in so you can see this. Boop. Okay, I'm going to just paste in those 2 lines into my terminal again. Ta-da! The settings.xml file is created. Isn't it like magic sometimes? I'm like, that was so fast. I really didn't have to do too much, to create this. I just had to run these 2 lines, and already I have my settings.xml file ready for me to add in some more code. So what we're putting into our settings.xml file now is pretty much the settings for Maven to find code artifact and then access the repositories in code artifact. Because these are connection instructions from our code artifact repository itself, it's kind of like saying, hey, if you want to connect to me, make sure you have a settings.xml file, and make sure your settings.xml file has all of these details in it so that your project can actually connect to my repository. So I'm pretty much just copying in what code artifact is telling me to say to my Maven, my package manager, so that it can correctly find the code artifact repository I've just created, and then basically install or make sure that there's a copy of all of the packages and the dependencies it needs in there. So you just have to copy whatever is in step 4, step 5, and step 6 over into here, your settings.xml file. You just have to press save again. Don't forget to click on that cute little Command S or Control S on your computer. And then those changes are saved, and you're ready to complete your connection between code artifact and your web app project. So let's test that connection. Technically, that connection is set up now. Okay, we've put in all of the connection instructions in our settings.xml file. So does it work? Okay, does it work? Let's test it out now by running this line in our terminal. And this line, what this line is doing is it's compiling our app. Okay, and compiling is a very, very interesting process I found, because what compiling does is it translates your project's code from programming language. In our case, we're doing a Java web app, so it's translating it from Java over into machine language. I know sometimes when you're looking at code, you're like, wow, I'm talking in machine language because look how technical this stuff is. These are definitely not paragraphs and sentences. I'm writing in lines of code. But actually, your computer doesn't naturally understand programming language either. It actually needs to translate whatever programming language you've written into the machine code so that you're actually speaking the machine's language. And that's what compiling does. It does that translation service for you. And compiling also helps to start building your project, which means actually making sure that all of the packages that your web app needs in order to run and function properly are being dragged into your environment. so that your environment can actually run this application. Very nice. This is looking cute, isn't it? It says the build is successful. Thank you very much. And we can now head back to the Code Artifact console and select the repository that we've created in Code Artifact and see what's in there now. Do you remember how we said before there were no packages in our Code Artifact repository because the repository is not even connected to our web app project yet? So what happens if I click refresh now? What do you think we're going to see? Look at that. Isn't that interesting? All of a sudden, all these packages are now in my Code Artifact repository. Udawak Promise says hello in the chat. Hello! It's so good to see you. I've been closely following all of your posts, all of the projects that you've been doing, so it's an honor for you to be here right now. Thank you so much. And yeah, look at that. All of these packages are now installed in my Code Artifact repository, which means that that connection has been very, very successful. Code Artifact is now set up to install and keep a backup copy of all of the packages involved in my web app. So that was a smashing success, and we're now ready to wrap up project 3 of the series by setting up an IAM policy. So I'm going to copy this policy. Oh, actually, maybe I don't. Actually, no, I am going to copy this policy code right now. I'm going to copy this policy code, and I'm going to go to my IAM console. Okay. And from my IAM console, I'm going to find the policies page and create a new policy. So why am I creating a policy? The reason for that is because by default, Code Artifact, the repositories in there, isn't very easy to access. Okay, Code Artifact has been very good to make sure that. Oh, actually, sorry, I'm almost doing the wrong thing. I should be clicking on JSON and then pasting the policy that I've created here. But Code Artifact has been very good in keeping all of our repositories of dependencies and packages really safe. So by default, a lot of these services, even the other services in the AWS code family, which are very tightly knit together to create that CI/CD pipeline, but all of these other services that we're going to be using next, they don't have access actually to your repository by default. So we're creating a policy that's kind of like a rule book, or it's actually kind of like an access pass that we're going to give to these services and be like, okay, you can have access to the Code Artifact repository. You can have access to the Code Artifact repository. Same for you, same for you. So whoever gets granted this policy is kind of like granted a wristband to get access to your Code Artifact repository. That's why we're creating this policy. And let's click next, and let's give it a name. Code Artifact Network Consumer Policy. Consumer being they're now a user of the packages and the dependencies that's stored in Code Artifact now. And we're going to give it a description. Cute. There's a description now that says provides permissions to read from Code Artifact. And we're going to click create. All right, it's getting created now. It has been created. The policy has a green tick. So we have officially concluded the setup steps for today's project. Really exciting. We're now going to go into the meat of this new section. So we have set up Code Artifact now to securely store and manage our project's dependencies. Tick. Let's move on to using AWS CodeBuild. As a recap, I know we've done a lot of steps just now. What does CodeBuild actually do? CodeBuild helps us automate the building process. What that means is just now we would have run a line in a Cloud9 terminal, okay, that compiles our web app. Okay, it's many lines up. I'm gonna see if I can find it. If I can't, it's okay. We can find it somewhere else always. Okay, I actually can't find it. Wow, it's actually that many lines up. But over here, when we were wanting to test our Code Artifact connection, we ran this line that says compile application. We ran this. So remember how I said like that compiling is like translating from programming language into machine code. And then after that translation happens, how do you make sure servers can actually run your application? There's actually so many mini steps involved in making sure your application can actually run on a computer. So after you've translated it into machine code, you want to package all of that machine code into one file. Because right now, look at all of these different files that make up your app. It's quite a lot. So how do you make this easy for servers to run? You do this by bundling up all of that machine code into one package called a war file. And the in-depth description for everything I've just mentioned is right here. You know, and you're more than welcome to give this a read as well. We're going to read this over in a second as well. And once you've created that war file, it's kind of like that one file for all kind of thing. Now, if I give this war file to another server, they're like, okay, I can now deploy your application. Give this war file to another server, and they're like, okay, I have everything I need now. You've given me literally all the packages I need, all of the files I need to run this web app. I can now deploy your application. And that's why this building process is so important, because it makes sure that this application you've spent so much effort into creating can actually be understood by the servers and actually be and make sure that your servers can actually run this and make it available to other people. So the first step in getting CodeBuild ready for us is to set up an S3 bucket. Okay, so you're wondering, why are we creating an S3 bucket? So this S3 bucket will later store a file that gets created in the build process you're about to set up. Let's create this bucket in advance so that when CodeBuild can be configured properly in the next step. So we're kind of like doing a bit of pre-work by setting up this S3 bucket. And know that file that gets created in the build process, that is called a build artifact. And build artifacts are basically this catch-all term that describes all of the files that gets created from a build process. In this example, we are creating that war file, which I mentioned is that like bundle of machine code or that bundle of build artifacts that make up your web app. And it really just works like a zip file. So whatever server you give that war file to will just unzip the war file you've created to see like a bunch of other files, and now have like all the files they need to run your web app. So you might be also thinking, why are we compiling again with AWS CodeBuild? Because CodeBuild and that build process starts with compiling your web app. Didn't I already compile something already? When I ran this line? When I ran this line back then, I was already compiling. So am I just doubling up work here? Good question if you're thinking that already. The compiling that takes place in CodeBuild is exactly the same as the compiling we just ran manually in the terminal. So CodeBuild's difference is it's actually just going to help us automate that process. So now later on when we set up CodeBuild automatically, or when we set up CodeBuild properly, we won't need to paste that command in our terminal as much anymore. It's just going to automate that process for us. So that's super handy. Okay, so let's get started with creating that S3 bucket. We're going to find our S3 console in our AWS Management Console. And then we're going to click on that. Very nice. And then we're going to click Create Bucket over here to create our S3 bucket. Our bucket is going to have a unique name. It's going to be called Network Build Artifacts. Your name. Make sure to give it a little personal twist by adding your name at the end. And then after you leave all the other settings as default, you can just click Create Bucket at the very bottom here. Done. That was so easy. That was the setup done for our S3 bucket. So all we have to do now is take a screenshot of that S3 bucket we created and start documenting our work now. So we can find it here next to Build Artifacts, and I am going to take a screenshot of it. Screenshot. Nice. And let's write down our thoughts in our documentation template. So flick to the page that says Set up an S3 bucket. Sound familiar? And let's paste that in here. So, okay, my image isn't really showing me much. So I'm going to double click on my image and just drag this down so that my frame now shows me my S3 bucket name. Very cool. And I'm going to fill in the prompts to share my thoughts. I started my project by creating an S3 bucket because this bucket will later catch an important build artifact that gets created from the build process I'm setting up with CodeBuild. The key artifact that this S3 bucket will capture is called a WAR file. Oh, what does WAR stand for? Java Web Application Resource, I think. But you can always double check. Oh, it genuinely slipped my mind. Oh my goodness. What does a WAR file stand for? Web Application Resource. Okay, awesome. Yeah, it could also stand for Web Application Archive. So it's really up to you which one you prefer. Web Application Resource. And this file is important because it ensures that any server that will host my web app will have all of the resources, tools it needs to successfully run my application. Yeah, I think the key thing about the build process is you're actually it's all about creating this magical file called a WAR file that's eventually going to be passed on to the next step of this process, and let that next step of the process really run with this file that you've just created. So it's super, super cool. It's like this entire build process creates a really, really important file, and it's like the ultimate prep work, I feel, when just creating this file becomes like its own big step. In this case, it's like using AWS CodeBuild. Okay, so I've just written my documentation for this, and I'm ready for the next step. So let's check out the next step now. And it is to create our build project. So let's find the CodeBuild console, which you can go visit by just clicking on. Okay. So if you still have your code artifact tab open, you can actually just find CodeBuild at the sidebar as well for code artifact, and you can click on build projects to get started. This is cool. This is cool. Okay, so we're now at the CodeBuild page now, and we are ready to create a project. Very cool. Now that we are here, we're going to name our project Network Web Build. And we're going to expand this little additional configuration toggle to add a tag. Our tag is going to say Team DevOps. It's like staking our claim. Wow, Tishepo says finally caught a live project. I'm so glad you're here too, Tishepo. Wow, welcome. And congratulations on all of the progress you've been making on your projects. It's been awesome to see. Okay, so we have started kicking off our build project, and in the source panel, we're going to say the source is AWS code commit. What does this mean? Okay, take a quick pause. What does source mean? Source is basically the source of the web app project that our code build process is going to actually build. In more detail, CodeBuild will be ready to start compiling your web app, but it doesn't actually know where the code is stored. It's like, okay, I'm ready to compile your web app. I'm ready to turn it into machine code. I'm ready to create that WAR file that you want. But where's the code that I'm going to compile? Where is it? And source is the location of that code. It's like saying, oh yeah, there it is. Go there. Go to AWS code commit, because that is where I save the latest changes and the latest updates to my web app code. So in the repository, we're just going to select that repository that's storing our Java web app, and the branch is going to be called main. We only have one branch, and this is going to end up being like another deep dive for you if you dive into this area. But different branches can also represent like different versions of the same web app. In this case, we're going to keep things simple with only just one branch, and that's called main. Okay. Yeah, and there are many options for the source provider you're going to see. Like there are lots of different other options for where your CodeBuild project can find the source code from, which means your code doesn't have to live in code commit. Even though like using code commit can result in a really, really tight integration. Like they work really, really well together. So once we selected main as the branch, under the environment, let's now do a bit of setup. Okay, the provisioning model is going to be called on-demand. Environment image, make sure it's called managed image. The compute is EC2. Operating system is Linux. Runtime is standard. And then the image, this is where you have to change something, is Corretto 8. Corretto 8 is the version of Java that we installed earlier in this project. So we're going to make sure that they're consistent so that the environment that's about to compile our project can actually understand the language that our project is written in. And the image version, always use the latest image. And we're going to create a new service role as well. Okay, I know this is a little bit of new information, so we're going to track back to the start of this environment panel and have a bit of a slower dive into, okay, what do these configuration steps mean? Oof, here we are. So first of all, what even is environment? Abbas Ibrahim in the chat says, let's go. Let's go, Abbas. Thanks for being here. And the environment panel is helping you set up all of the software, the tools, the settings, the configurations that your application needs to function properly. You've actually learned about environment from project 1 of the series because IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So an IDE is pretty much the perfect environment for writing and editing your code. So that's why Cloud9 has been so great for us to actually edit, that index.jsp file where we said like, hello, name, and we set up basically what our web app's going to be, what our web app is going to look like. But here, we're going to create a whole different kind of environment that's now made for actually that build process. It's now this environment we're creating is now going to be designed for compiling, testing, and then packaging your code into that WAR file. Note that this environment is also not the actual application server that's going to host your web app. That comes later. So that really goes to show that different environments exist for different reasons. We have the development environment that exists for you to build your web app, build the code, actually like write the code. And then right now, this is the build environment. I realize I've used build twice now, which might be a bit confusing, but let me backtrack. So the first thing that we created was a development environment, which is for you to write your code and edit your code, save your code, all that stuff. And then here, this is the build environment, which is all about compiling your code, testing what you've compiled, making sure that machines can actually run it, and then packaging it all up into this nice little file called a WAR file. That's what this environment's all about. The next environment is going to be all about deploying your code, like making it, now that you have all that beautiful file, like shooting it into the world. Okay, that's the next environment. But this environment, building. And yeah, we have things like provisioning model. This one just tells us that AWS will create the resources that we need only when you start it, and then tear down all of the resources when you're done with compiling and when you're done with the build process. Environment image. This one is about saying if you'd like to use a template. So environment images are like pre-configured versions of that build environment we're trying to make. So you don't need to actually install all the software, the tools, and the settings required to build a project from scratch. That would take so much time. Just use a template. Use a managed image. And that's why, because we've selected to use a managed image, AWS is like, okay, you want to use a template, tell me which template you want to use. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, so this is the template I want to use. My IDE, my development environment, is using Amazon Linux, so can we just make sure that's the same? It's not using any special languages, it's just using Java, so it's a standard language, let's just keep it standard, okay? And then the image, can you please make sure that whatever virtual computer is now going to be building my project, can you just please make sure that it's capable of building in Corretto 8? Because Corretto 8 was the language that I used to write my web apps code. And then the last thing here, the image version is set to always use the latest version. So we're always up to date with that, the latest security updates and the latest bug fixes for Java Corretto 8. Okay, cool. Now, last thing is the new service role. So the service role is like the IAM role that grants AWS services permissions to access other resources in your account. We opted for a new service role. So what that means is there's now going to be a role in AWS IAM that's made just for this code build project. And then this role is going to be like, okay, so to actually build your project, you're going to need access to this resource. You're going to need access to this resource. You're going to need access to this resource. So we're going to make sure it's on the access that it needs to actually successfully build this project. Okay, and then that's the environment panel done. There's even more to set up. There's something called build spec, and we're going to use the option that says use a build spec file. And what is a build spec file? Why are we using one? A build spec file tells CodeBuild exactly the commands to run during the build process. It's so good. It's such a good file. So keep this information in your mind. Build spec is very, very key in this project. And it basically says in a build spec file, it's pretty much like a file of commands. All the commands we run in the terminal, it's kind of like a file just filled with those commands. And what's going to happen is when CodeBuild is now active and it's going to start building your project, it's just going to say, okay, what was the first line in build spec? And then let's just run that command first. And then we're going to run that command next to compile the code, so on and so forth. We haven't created that build spec file yet. That file doesn't exist, but we will in a minute. So we're going to just tell CodeBuild now, later on, find that build spec file because we're going to use it to go through with that build process. Okay, and then we have the artifacts panel, over here, and we're going to select Amazon S3 as the type. You might remember we were just talking about something called build artifacts, and this is basically the panel that's telling CodeBuild once you're in that build process, these are the artifacts. These are where you should store the artifacts you create. So we're saying, okay, store it in the bucket, the S3 bucket I set up in step 2 of this project. So here, next to build artifacts Natasha is where we want it. And the name of the build artifact you create should be called next with build.zip. So we're just setting up the name for the build artifact, the name for that WAR file that gets created. And then we're going to say package everything into a zip file, one zip file. I don't want it to be many, many different files scattered across my S3 bucket. I want it to be one zip file that compresses all the files you need to run my app into one place. Cool. Doom, doom, doom. The next panel. Wow, look at all the settings that gets involved when you build a project. Do you see why CodeBuild is such a good tool? Because now all you have to do is set up this CodeBuild project, and it's just going to run this automatically for you every time now. Otherwise, you would have had to set this up every single time you want to build a project. Every single time you're like, okay, I've made my changes, I should build my project. Every time you have to do this manually. But then with CodeBuild, you're literally setting this up once, and it's going to do this automatically for you from now on. Okay, that's why it's so valuable. So under the logs panel, we're going to enable CloudWatch logs. And CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch is another AWS service, and CloudWatch logs collect and store these log files from other AWS services in your account, CodeBuild being one of them. These log files are like diaries where everything that happens when the service is running gets recorded. By enabling CloudWatch logs for CodeBuild, we're keeping an eye out. We can keep an eye on CodeBuild's logs and just get a record of exactly what happened during the build process today. This helps us understand and fix any issues that come up, making it very easy for us to see what worked and what didn't. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What it's trying to say is by ticking that box to enable CloudWatch logs, we now have a diary entry for every single time CodeBuild is building our web app project. This is really, really useful because imagine one day CodeBuild's like, hey, sorry, by the way, I tried to build your project and it failed. I don't know why, but it failed and it didn't work. And you're like, why did it work? Can you tell me why? And if the error message isn't helping you at all, and this happens all the time, sometimes error messages are a bit vague or it doesn't feel like it's hitting the right thing. It's targeting the right issue. You can go back and read the diary that CodeBuild has written for you and say oh, so this is what happened first. This is what happened second when you were trying to build. This is what happened third. Oh, okay. this is where that issue must have happened, because this is something that I don't think this is something that I don't think that should have happened. Maybe this is where that source of the issue really lies. And that's why CloudWatch logs are so useful. And we're going to just set the CloudWatch group name to network build logs. It's kind of like a folder name over here. And then the stream name prefix is called webapp. And a stream is a very, very cute name. I always think of river streams when I see the word stream. But in this case, a stream is like a dedicated channel where you can see all the activities for a group of log events in one place. In this case, the web app stream is now going to catch all of the logs related to the build process of your web application. And then multiple streams can now can fold under the same group name as well. Okay, cool. Now let's just create the build project to finish. And we're going to take a screenshot of our build project now. Okay, so once this build project is done creating, wow, look at all the settings that we've just created. Isn't it so good that this is now all just going to be automated from us from now on? Like, no more going through that process every time you want to build your project. CodeBuild's like, I got you. Like, I know the settings you want now. Let me just automate it for you. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this right now. And we're ready for documenting. Let's do it together. So let me flick back to the page with my documentation template on it. And let's start writing down our learnings. So in the page that says set up a CodeBuild project, I'm going to first paste my screenshot. I'm going to drag that in here. And then I'm just going to make sure it looks cute. This is my completed project ready for the first build. So good. So good. Okay, so what are we going to write in our documentation for this step? This step is asking us to review what were the 5 key configurations we set up. Do you think we can do it? I think we can do it. Come on, we can do this. Okay, the source means, let me just start by reading the sentence. When creating a project in CodeBuild, there were 5 key configurations I set up. So these 5 configurations were source, environment, build spec, artifacts, and logs. We talked about all 5 just now, and let's recap our learnings. So source means the source of the project's code or files. I selected code commit, AWS code commit, as that is my cloud repository for my project's files. And that's why it's so important for you to save all of the changes you make and make sure those saved changes fly up to your cloud repository. Because now CodeBuild is going to look at your cloud repository and say, I'm going to build that. It's not going to build whatever's in your Cloud9 IDE. That's just your working space. It's going to build from what's been saved up in your cloud code commit repository. Environment, which means the set of resources, tools, resources, configurations required to build my web app. I selected an EC2 instance with Amazon Linux 2. Running Amazon Linux 2, and Java Corretto 8 as the runtime. Build spec. What is build spec? Build spec is the settings. What's the best way to say build spec? I'm actually gonna take a little gaze at my project steps to have a look at how build spec was explained. How is build spec explained over here? Build spec tells CodeBuild exactly the commands to run during the build process. Okay, build specs, which are the commands to run in my local computer's terminal during the build process, which are the set, I think I would say the set of commands. I selected, what did we select? Use a build spec file. Okay, oof, you're now seeing that this is getting a little tight-knit, our artwork. It's okay, I'm just gonna expand it here first. It's still looking pretty cute. Okay, I'm gonna expand my work a little. Artifacts, which means the files that get created, which means where CodeBuild should store. Oof, my typing is a bit horrendous. Should store the build artifacts. The build artifacts that get produced in the build process. I selected, what did we select? We selected the S3 bucket we created in step 2. Boop. Logs, which means whether I like to keep records of every time of every single build process that CodeBuild does. I selected, what did we select specifically? It was enable couch. I enabled CloudWatch logs. I did. And I think I can just full stop it there. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes less is more. Okay, I'm very, very happy with the way my documentation looks for this step. Wow, look at all the learnings we did in just that one step. We learned a lot about how building works, didn't we? Very impressive. Good work. Good work. And let's move on to the next step. So in the next step, we are now creating our web app's buildspec.yml file. And we're going to keep this in the root of our code repository. So now you might be thinking, wait, what is the root of our code repository? To see the answer for that, let's visit Cloud9 again and have a visual answer to that. So when you look at your web app and how it's structured, the root is pretty much the main folder. Okay, so if I'm saying that it's at the root of the code repository, it's right underneath the main folder. What's in the root right now? The root right now has this folder called src, a folder called target, a file called pom.xml, a file called settings.xml. And what we're saying now is we're going to create a new file. It's going to be called buildspec.yml. It's going to be sitting right underneath these two. Okay, we're going to have a new file that's sitting in the root. And what is a buildspec.yml file? Okay, we just wrote documentation on this, so I hope you haven't forgotten. And that buildspec.yml file is going to keep all of the commands that CodeBuild is going to run line by line to build your web app. So having that buildspec.yml file makes sure that every build follows the exact same steps and produces consistent results. Cool. So let's head back into Cloud9 IDE and let's create a new file here and call it buildspec.yml. That's what we're creating, right? Nice. So once we have this file ready to go, we're going to double click on it. So that, oh, that is not the right file I've clicked on. We're going to click on buildspec.yml. Oh, double click. Okay, and now it's opened it up for me. I know this is quite small, so I'm going to just do a bit of a shimmy on my screen so that you can see this a bit more clearer. Okay. But let me know at any time if you'd like for me to drag my screens around. Okay, so we have our buildspec.yml file ready for us to fill it in with some information. And let's do that right now. So we have our buildspec.yml file's contents already ready for you to go. So we're going to copy that straight away. But let's also understand what we're copying, okay? We're copying it now so we have a visual reference of what we're going to talk about. Save your file, don't forget, press that Command S or Control S, and let's talk about what's in that buildspec.yml file. Oh, actually, before we have that chat though, there is a reminder. Make sure the name after -- domain is the actual domain name. Okay, so do you see -- domain? Make sure the name after that is actually your domain name. And from us, it's Nextwork. That was the code artifact domain name we've created. And then it says replace that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like replace that placeholder with your actual account ID for your AWS account. So you can find your account ID by just clicking into any page with your AWS Management Console, click on your name, and your account ID is handy for you to copy right here. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. Save your changes, and then let's talk about what we're doing here. So again, buildspec.yml is pretty much a file of lines that's going to be run in our terminal every time we want to kick off that build process. So think of it in that way, and just know, top line says version, and that's basically the version of how this build spec file is written. It's not too important, so we're going to skip into the phases section. And the phases is split into 4 sections. Do you see that? We have install, we have pre-build, we have build, we have post-build, and it's basically structuring our YML file to say, before you start building, run these commands. When you build, run these commands. After you build, run these commands. The install at the very, very top is also just saying like, oh, by the way, make sure this runtime, this version of Java is installed before you even start building, because that's the language we're using to even write the web app. Make sure you speak the language that you're going to try compile. So pre-build contains the commands to run before you build your web app. Okay, first line, echo initializing environment. So this is telling your terminal to print out initializing environment in the terminal as a message to give you some feedback that this environment setup process is now starting, okay? Fire starting now. And the next is export code artifact auth token, and it's like a very long line that contains the domain we just entered, that contains the account ID we just entered, and also something that says query authorization token. So what this line does is it gets an authorization token, which is like that wristband, that access pass from AWS code artifact, that repository that contains all of those dependencies and packages. Maven will later use that access pass to securely access that repository so they can actually take those packages away. Like, not take it away, but like grab it and use it for compiling the web app. Next, the build commands kicks off the build process. So echo, whenever you see echo, it basically just means print this out. So it's saying print out, build started on date. Okay, followed by, which is the date, followed by the date, which is going to look like the current time. And again, every time it says echo, it's just giving you feedback. So it's saying, hey, print this in the terminal. So whoever is running this in the terminal, whoever is using the terminal has feedback that this build is starting now. And then this line might look very, very familiar. It is the golden line to compile the project using the settings in the settings.xml file. So we've already run this command manually before, at the very start of this project, but now it's automated because now it's going to be in the buildspec.yml file. Post-build, this section runs another 2 commands in your terminal. First one says echo. Remember what echo means. Echo is just giving you feedback. It's just printing something in the terminal. So it's going to print something literally right here for you to know, like for you to read an update, basically. And now this next echo says build completed on date. So it's just giving you feedback that the build has finished. And the last line, MVN settings XML package. So this line is telling Maven to package up all of the compiled code into that single WAR file using the settings in the settings.xml file. Okay, so the settings.xml file has already configured up some stuff that Maven is going to use to compile the code. At the very bottom, though, there's an extra section called artifacts, and this section is basically including all the commands to manage the WAR file that gets created. So we've created a WAR file, but we need this line, target Nextwork web project.war, to tell the terminal to select the WAR file in the target folder as a build artifact. So what that means is when that file gets created, it automatically goes into this random file in your project space called target. But you actually need to tell the terminal, like, can you select this? Click on this WAR file that I've just created. And the next line, this card path says, make sure this file that you've just clicked on, save it in the target folder. If the discard path was set to yes, okay, right now it says no, but if it was set to yes instead, the WAR file would just be saved in the directory in the root, and that's not really neat. Okay, we're just saying select this and keep it in this folder. Don't let it automatically fly into the root of my repository, or the root of my directory. Cool, so we're ready now to save this file by pressing Command S and then take a screenshot to write down all of our learnings. So let's take a screenshot now. Of our buildspec.yml file. I'm so sorry. I accidentally flipped my mouse. Oh my goodness, that gave me a fright. But we took our screenshot at least. So we took our screenshot, and let's just put that into our documentation template. So took the screenshot, put that into the create a buildspec.yml file. I see that you guys are laughing in the reactions. Thank you so much for keeping me company. And let us fill in the prompts as well. Okay, so the prompt says, I created a buildspec.yml file that at where in our code repository did we add the buildspec.yml file? Do you remember? Where we kept it was right here. Okay, in this main folder. What was this main folder called? Do you remember the name of that main folder? It is the root of our code repository. At the root of our code repository. This file contains 4 phases that tells our build environment what commands to run, okay? So these 4 phases were, do you remember them? Do you remember one of those phases? Do you remember the name of one of those? It'll be very cool if you do. I'd be very impressed. These 4 phases were install, which is like, i.e. install these dependencies before you start compiling. In this case, it was only in this project. It's Java Corretto 8. And then the next one is pre-build. i.e. what was pre-build about? Do you remember what pre-build is about? i.e. before Maven starts building, retrieve an access token to our code artifact repository so we can fetch dependencies later. I am quite a wordy person, aren't I? Wow, I never thought of myself as a talkative person until the time I write these documentation. And I'm like, okay, never mind. I am pretty wordy. Third, what is the third phase? The third is build. i.e. Oh, Gabrielle says you're amazing, Nat. Thank you so much. I think you're amazing too. Oh, 3 for 3, by the way. So good to see you here again. IE to build our web app project, run these commands. The fourth phase, post-build. So IE, after building our web app project, what do we do? What do we do? Package it up. So after building our web app project, package up the machine code using the settings in the settings.xml file. Done. Okay, I'm very happy with this. As you might notice, our documentation template's looking a bit packed, but it's cute. I think wordiness is in. It's in style, I swear. It probably isn't. I feel like right now it's the rise of minimalism, but it's okay. We'll keep our documentation a bit on the wordy side to really express what we've learned today. Oh. Okay, so now let's get started with the next step. We're going to commit our changes and push it to code commit by running the following prompts. So we have these prompts that's going to help us with saving all of our changes to that code commit repository. And this line is so important. Do you remember why? By any chance, do you remember why? You know, we've just set up our code build to say you're going to build whatever is in the code commit repository. You're not going to build whatever is in Cloud9. That's just our IDE. That's just our development environment. You're going to be building whatever is the code that's saved in the repository. So if you're not committing your latest changes and pushing it into code commit, what's going to be in code commit? It's not going to be all of these things that we've just written up, because we haven't saved it yet. We're going to really need to make sure we're always committing our changes, okay? Committing it and then pushing it into our code commit repository so that whenever code builds, like, okay, I'm ready to build now, I'm ready to compile all this code, it has all the code it needs to compile. So let's run all these lines, and you can run all 4 at once. You can just copy all 4 and paste it into your terminal in one go. Paste it, press enter, bam. And look at that. If you read the terminal, it is saying, wow, it's saying quite a bit, but it's basically giving you a bit of feedback, saying like, okay, it's going to compress all of the objects. It's going to make sure all of those changes you've made is getting written up into that code commit repository. Okay, so now all of those changes are reflected in that code commit repository. We've saved it there. And we're almost ready to build. Cool. Okay, before we actually click that build button, very, very tempting, but we're not going to do it yet because we have something we need to do. We need to modify that CodeBuild IAM service role. What? Do you remember that we created a new service role where we were creating our CodeBuild, our build project? What happened there is we talked about how that service role gives CodeBuild the permissions it needs to build your project. And right now, there's actually a permission missing. There's a permission missing in CodeBuild because when we first created that CodeBuild project, we didn't really try to connect it with our code artifact repository. We just said, this is how you're going to be building a Java web app that's stored in this code commit repository. But what about all of those packages that CodeBuild is going to need access to? Right now, it doesn't actually have access to it because, as a recap, Code Artifact is pretty good at keeping all of those repositories and those packages tight to its site, to its treasure chest, okay? To its chest. So what that means is we actually need to manually give CodeBuild that wristband access to Code Artifact so that it has access to it and be able to compress and compile all of those packages into that same WAR file. So shall we do that? Let's visit IAM and let's click on roles over here. Roles in the sidebar takes us to all the roles that's in our IAM console. And here, you can just search for CodeBuild to narrow it down straight to the role that represents your CodeBuild build project. To give it that permission to access your code artifact repository, click on refresh first, by the way. Let's just make sure, let's just see, are there any policies that's in there right now? Aha! Always click refresh because it gives you like a better, most up-to-date version of what's happening in here. And right now, it already has 2 policies. Okay, the first policy, I just have a little geese because I'm feeling nosy today. The first policy basically gives us the permission to put all of the code artifact, that build artifact, that WAR file into the S3 bucket when we're done with the build process. You know, gives us access to actually see what's in our code commit repository and take the code that's in our code commit repository. That's very important. Again, the build artifacts, amazing. You know, it has a good amount of permission policies for us to, 1, get the code, the source code from code commit, and 2, store the build artifacts that the build process generates into a S3 bucket. There's even a 3 here. We've given it the permission to write those diary entries, write those logs in CloudWatch. So it has a pretty good set of permissions, but do you see how code artifacts not mentioned there? And we need to make sure that it actually has access to those those packages in code artifact. So let's click add permissions here, and let's attach a policy for code artifact. And we've created that policy before. So it's already here, customer managed, and let's add that here. Nice. So once that's done, take a screenshot of the permissions policies panel here, and let's save that into our documentation template. So I'm going to take a screenshot now, and let's save that in our documentation template. Cool beans. Let's save it over here. In the next slide, though, which says edit CodeBuild's IAM role. Looking cute, looking cute. Let's drag this over so that it fills up the space nicely. Oh, that's a beautiful screenshot. I'm a fan of this screenshot. And let's fill in the prompts. So what's in our prompts today? Our prompts say, before I start building my web app project, exciting, I modified my CodeBuild project service role first. That is exactly what we did. This role was first created when was the service role created? First created when I set up my CodeBuild project. I checked the setting for create a new service role. Oh, someone in the reaction scene is like reacting hearts right now to this documentation. Me too. I love documentation time. I attached a new policy called ... to my CodeBuild project's IAM role. Yeah, I did attach a new policy, didn't we? What was that policy called? It was called code artifact next to consumer policy. So let's attach this new policy. To my CodeBuild project's IAM role. Nice. This means my CodeBuild project now has access to the artifacts. Oh, sorry, not artifacts, to the packages or dependencies that it will later compile. This is looking good. I like it. Ooh, looking slick. Okay, now that we're happy with our documentation, let's go to the final step of, I guess, like the hands-on technical part of today's project before we delete our resources and before we wrap up our documentation as well. Let's test the build project. Now that we have everything in place to run our first build, let's do it. So head back to your CodeBuild console. Okay, CodeBuild console, where are you? Can you find it? It's over here. And let's click on Start Build. Okay. Cool. So this build process is going to take a little bit of time. Um, and what we can do in the meantime is have a little geese of all the steps we're about to do next. Once the build is complete, we will have to head back to our S3 console. So once this is finished building, what's going to happen? Once it's finished building, what would have happened is all of those lines that were running in our buildspec.yml file, they're going to run. So what's happening right now is our local computer or our build environment is now running all of these commands we set up. So it's running, the echo initializing environment is running, export your code artifact token. It's compiling things for us. It's packaging things into our WAR file for us. It's doing all of these things right now, in this build process. And then once the build is complete, we're going to head to our S3 console, and we're going to look into the bucket that's supposed to store that WAR file that gets created to verify, was there a WAR file that got created? If there is, it means the build process was a success. So that's how we verified that everything we set up was set up correctly. I'm a bit impatient, so I'm already checking if it's done. And what happens after that? After that, we're just going to be taking our screenshots and wrapping up the last step of our documentation. So wasn't that pretty cool? What we've set up so far in the new parts of today's project is all about automating a very, very important step in making your web app available to the world, building. We've just taught CodeBuild and basically Maven and our terminal, all of the lines that it's going to need to run to build a project on its own so that I don't need to manually run these commands anymore. And when it's done running these commands, it's going to automatically save the WAR file that gets created in an S3 bucket. Like, I don't need to somehow click save and do anything funny. Isn't that so cool? Like, our system is now set up to run all of these things on its own without needing a lot of manual intervention anymore. And the less manual intervention that we need, the less manual mistakes that can get created. And all of this also helps with making things consistent. Now, every single build is definitely going to be very, very consistent with each other. Eric in the chat says hello. Hey, Eric. It's good to see you again. You're catching us at the end of our live today. Wow, how was your day today? Eric, you must be a lucky charm. We've just succeeded in building our project. And remember what we said? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to head to our S3 console. So let's do that. And we have our bucket right here, right? Right now, there are 0 objects. What's going to happen when I refresh? Cross my fingers. Wow, look at that. So our project today is a huge, huge, huge success. We have our WAR file that's in this bucket right now, representing that the build project has successfully compiled everything and packaged everything into a nice WAR file and even saved that into an S3 bucket for us. So this Nextwork web build.zip is now a packaged version of all of the files that a server is going to need to deploy our web app. Isn't that so cool? So congrats on this huge success. Let's take a screenshot of the S3 bucket with the zip file inside. And let's wrap up our documentation. Cool. Let's put that in here. I think I'm going to just show off my zip file because that's what I really want to show off. Boop. And let's fill in our documentation. Eric says today is good. I will rewatch everything. Okay. I hope you learned something new from this project today. I'm very excited to be doing this with you. To build my first project, all I had to do was select the Start Build button all I had to do was select that Start Build button in my CodeBuild console. Super simple. The build process in CodeBuild took, how long did it take? It took about 5 minutes. And once the build was complete, I checked which resource did you check when the build was done. Do you remember this? Come on, give it to me. What resource did we check? We checked we checked our S3 bucket that was set up at the start of this project to catch the build artifacts that get produced from our build process. I saw, what do we see? What do we see? It's a nice little thing that popped up in our screenshot as well. I saw a zip file, i.e. the WAR file. The WAR file that is the bundled up package of all the files, resources a server will need to run my web app. I.e. the WAR file. A bundled up package of all the files, resources a server will need to run my web app. I'm going to keep this in a bracket. Which verified that the build was completed successfully. Congratulations. With that being done, what else is left of our project today? We all just need to wrap up our documentation, which can take as little as 10 minutes. To wrap up your documentation today, choose one of your screenshots to go to your documentation's title page. Don't leave this blank, guys. Don't leave this blank. I'm going to just paste that same photo and put that in here. Okay, I'm going to put that here like this. And then replace that photo at the last page with a photo of you. Oopsie daisies. We have a default photo here that you can absolutely keep if it's a vibe. But if you want to make this a photo of you to really make this yours, I'd recommend that too. So here's a random photo of me that I can use instead. I literally took that today. I'm wearing the same shirt. And you can use that. You can use that to, you can even drag this around to really give whoever is seeing your documentation template like a "this is me" kind of thing, And then replace these icons throughout your documentation template with your name, professional profile picture, GitHub account name if you have a GitHub account. Here I will put my photo in here as well. Oh, that's not the right photo. I will put my photo in here by first clicking on it after I uploaded it in Canva. And then from here, you can just hold it and drag it to whatever circle you want to put it in. And ta-da, it snaps inside very, very quickly. And you can even double click on your photo and start dragging it around to reposition how it looks in the circle. So I quite like this. So I'm happy with this. I'll keep that. And your tip here is to copy that photo. Okay, copy it. And you can now paste that photo over here. And now it's a lot easier for you to just replace it like this if you like. Okay, so this is another way you can just make things faster. Because now what you can do, you can now also do Command F. So you can press Command F to open that Find panel, search for the text your name, and automatically replace it all with your actual name. So search for your name, or automatically replace all with Natasha Ong. Replace all. Ta-da. Now every single page is going to have your name on it without you having to edit it one by one. Okay? And now LinkedIn.com, your link. I think my LinkedIn URL just ends with Natasha Ong. So maybe just Natasha Ong like this. And then you can, again, to make that for every single page, go Command F, your link, and then change that to your actual LinkedIn link so that you can just automatically just put that across all of the pages without having you to edit it one by one. Replace all. Oh, something went wrong. Oh, my page needs some reloading. Needs a bit of love today. But you know, let's do this again. I'm gonna show you that it's possible. I'm gonna Command F, paste that, replace it with my LinkedIn URL, okay, over here. Replace all. All 7 matches were replaced. Isn't that just so satisfying? Now you don't even need to look for any other instances. It's all just been replaced for you. And the reason why I copied my image over here is because now Command C, press copy again, flick to the next page, paste. And then you can just, position it here again. So good. Do it again. And it's a lot easier now, rather than having to drag the same image again and again and again into the same little frame. And when you're done, you can share your key learnings in the slide that's titled My Key Learnings. We have even written some prompts for you to make this really easy. Over here, it's all stuff that you would have learned throughout this project. And then any final thoughts? Oh, you can share them in final thoughts, but we actually removed that slide because we realized that this slide is more important. Introducing AWS CodeBuild for you to write down an introduction to anyone that you're sharing this documentation with. Cool. So once it's done, share your work. Get added to our secret Hall of Fame. We do keep track of every single one of you that shares your PDF in the Nextweek community. You can just click on this link here. And you will get to see our All AWS Projects page. Click here and add your documentation in here. Okay? Or you can even share it on LinkedIn. Now, this is another level up. We give so much love to anyone that posts on LinkedIn because it's an absolute pleasure to have someone share their project to their network. So all you had to do was click on this link to open a pre-filled post. Literally, the copy is in there ready for you. All you have to do here now is click on plus, the more button, add a document, and then choose the PDF version. Let's say this is my PDF. Shout out to Andy, who finished his first project today and shared his documentation with us. Attach that to your post, and then you're just ready to post right away. Really, really cool. If you're also unfamiliar with how to save your documentation as a PDF, all you have to do is first click on that share button on the top right here. And then over here, you can click on, whoopsie daisies, I don't think you can see me clearly. You can click on download. And then from here, change the PNG to PDF standard. And then you can click download from there. Super easy. It's really good. And yeah, that's it for the documentation stuff that we're going to talk about. But please make sure that at the end of this project that you're deleting all your resources, all of them. Well, actually not all, because you don't have to delete the IAM user and the IAM policy you created for Code Artifact. You can keep these to speed up your setup for the next project. But everything else, let's delete it so you don't rack up any charges at all. And so that when you set up the next project, there aren't any conflicts with what's existing. So first things first, you know what? I'm going to challenge us today. I'm going to hide the steps for deleting. And now your challenge is to try to delete everything that you've created in this project. Why are we doing this? Because in the real world, no one's really reminding you what to delete at the end of your project. No one's really there to keep track for you. You kind of have to keep track yourself. And the intense thing is, if you forget to delete something, it might rack up charges for you. So keep that habit of deleting those resources you've created without needing a whole list to show you how, so that you can build up to creating your own projects from scratch and deleting all of those resources from scratch. The first thing I did was I deleted my CodeBuild build project. The next thing, I'm just going to work my way through this list. I'm going to delete the repositories I've created in Code Artifact. So I'm going to delete that here. Delete that next repository as well. Okay, and I'm going to delete the domain as well. Nice. After that, you can delete your repository and code commit. So let's delete this. Type delete in the field. Whew, a lot of deleting here. So do we think we're done? Is that all the resources for today? What else have we created? Give yourself a chance to just refresh. What have you created in today's project that you need to delete? Here's something else. The bucket that stores our WAR file. That needs deleting. So let's delete that as well. Permanently delete. Ooh. I really find it interesting that all of these delete prompts look kind of different in different AWS services. I'm like, the prompts that I'm writing is always slightly different depending on what I'm deleting. And I find it interesting, is it on purpose that it's all different? Is it because different people created these services, so the delete functions look different? I'm very curious. Okay, we've deleted our S3 bucket now. Tick, that's another one done. Anything else that we still need to delete? I'm gonna keep my ear open for all these suggestions. Let's delete our Cloud9 IDE. Let's make sure that IDE, which has done a huge service for us today, thank you so much, Cloud9, can be put to rest. So let's delete this environment as well. Type delete. Done. Okay, so that's our Cloud9 IDE as well. Is there anything else? There's actually still more. Isn't it wild, the number of resources that gets racked up over one project? There's still more to delete. What else is there to delete? We've also created CloudWatch logs. Do you remember ticking that box to enable logs for your CodeBuild project? Those CloudWatch logs need to be deleted. I've actually been charged before for accidentally keeping the logs for a project. And they're just so sneaky, I guess, because you're not manually going into CloudWatch and being like, let's create a log group, These log groups get created during the setup process of another resource. So sometimes you don't remember to delete it right away, but delete that too, okay? It's gonna cost storage cost if you leave it in your account. And is there anything else? Anything else? Yeah, there's still some more. We're gonna delete the CodeBuild role that we've created in IAM. Delete that. Okay, we don't need that. And it's actually free to keep this in your account. But the thing is, if you try to create your CodeBuild project the next time, you're going to run into a few issues because it's like, hey, you already have a service role. You already have this, this existing thing is living in your account, and it's going to stop you from building something again. So let's just delete it now to prevent that from happening. Is that everything? Let's check. Cloud9 console, tick. EC2. Did we delete that? Did we delete that? Let's check. So let's go into the EC2 console and let's look into our instances list to see if that's been removed. Now, interesting, EC2 instances are not here. Why is that? Because they were already terminated automatically or stopped when we turned off our Cloud9 IDE. We really don't need these anymore, so we can manage the instance state and turn that to terminate, which means like really just delete it. Instead of just stopping the EC2 instance, we're just going to delete it. But yeah, it's really cool to know that if you just delete your Cloud9 environment, EC2 will also stop automatically. But yeah, code commit, we've deleted the repository. Code artifact, we've deleted those repositories and the domain. Code build, we've deleted the project. And yeah, we've deleted the code build role. Oh, but have we deleted the code build policy? I don't think so. So let's go into our IAM and let's delete the policy. So IAM console, click on that. Policies, sitting here, click on that. And let's search for CodeBuild over here. Do you see that? Oh, wow. We can delete these right now as well. So let's click delete. And let's delete that CodeBuild base policy. So this is the policy that we've created for our CodeBuild project. And the next policy is the cloud ability to use CloudWatch. write CloudWatch logs. Let's delete that too. Oopsie daisies. Let's put this here. Okay. And I think we're pretty much done. The S3 bucket containing the WAR file, that's it. Deleted. Phew! And that is a wrap, my friends. Oh my goodness, was that project 4 of the DevOps series done? It sure is. Woohoo, everyone! High five to you. Thank you so much for being here. That was so much fun. It was crazy to see just how much you can learn in one project. That whole build process was full of learnings. Thank you so much to everyone that's reacting as well. This is super fun. So in the next project, there's still project 5 because there's more learnings to come. We're going to learn how to host and deploy that package war file with AWS CodeDuild. Yeah, we've created that neat little file, that neat little application, that neat little bundle at the end of this CodeBuild process that we're going to pass it on to the next project, and it's about hosting and deploying that package. But in the meantime, what have we learned today? We've set up an S3 bucket. We've created a build project. We've created our buildspec.yml file in Cloud9. We've modified an IAM role so that our CodeBuild project has access to the code artifact repository and the packages in there. And then we've tested the build project. We finally initiated a test build to verify our entire setup. It worked beautifully, and that WAR file in the end was saved neatly in our S3 bucket. I love how when we tested the build project, the final thing we checked was our S3 bucket, which was the first thing we created. It felt like a full circle there. So yeah, it's wild that all these learnings are packed in one project. Great work. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. A big shout out to everyone. Thank you so much to IBN. Thank you so much to Eunice. Thank you so much to Lawrence. Thank you so much to Thank you so much to Jong. Thank you so much to Uduak. Thank you so much to Tishepo. Thank you so much to Abbas. Thank you so much to Gabrielle. Thank you so much to Eric. It is so cool to have you all here in this place today doing this project with me. Absolutely, it just makes my day. And I hope to see you in the next project. Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you so much, John. Wow, and thank you so much to Plaxides for being here today. See you all. Bye.